Greetings everyone. This is an example of the invoice generator that I have converted from React to JavaScript in this tutorial. It is going to also have the ability to print that out, and this is not only the invoice but is the beginning of your team's task management. So the workflow will all start not only with the invoice, but the team will work on this list as well as far as projects to be taken care of. Here you can see that it'll generate and print out, or you can save a PDF style of the actual work order that you generated. And it's all done and hosted on GitHub for free. Let's go ahead and kind of delve into what I did to take this project out of a React.js application and into a vanilla JavaScript application that anyone can use without even running any kind of compiler. And let's get started. So let's go ahead and build out the file directory. I'm just going to run the console to build out folders and some generic files that we're going to need to get everything running locally. And you don't have to name files functionality or style.css. You name them whatever you're used to. This is just what I'm used to. So let's go ahead and serve locally. And as you notice, the hierarchy is here with the footer.js, and I've got the elements and the footer elements. So I'm now going to extract the React file, this work order form.js. I'm going to take all the functionality, and then obviously the JSX, it will be more of that will be on the index.html, and then the JS functionality of this work order form.js file will be basically copy and pasted over so we can get it going. Obviously use effect and the load ID, this is not going to really do anything good for us because we're not going to have an API anymore. Everything's going to be local storage. So the way that the functions are running and the way that everything is building is going to be different. We'll build it on load as opposed to mapping a lot of things. And as you can see here, I've inserted the HTML above our old footer that we're familiar with. I'm taking all the maps from all the drop-down menus. They're drop-down menus with numbers, like how many modules is this events, how many modules do you want events to have, how many events or how many images are you going to have modules for, like slideshows, this and that. These all are the same drop-down, numeric drop-down. So what I'm going to do is change the functionality on these HTML elements so that they work in static.js, and then I'm going to map them out initially in a string and then attach them later on once the page loads. So we don't use map per se, we use a for loop to build it, and then we just have an HTML target. And as you can see, I'm just busy going through all the function calling and making it correct syntax for using your standard vanilla JavaScript file instead of React. So we're not really doing a lot of use effect and use state because it doesn't really exist in here. But those are just as easy to replace and use as a variable instead. So it's actually less work and very easy to happen. Happenstance, it actually happens faster than set state. So you don't have a waiting period that you have to deal with. And I'm still kind of coming through here, and now I've copied the functionality. I don't need to import anything because this is no longer React. All these use states are useless now because I'm not using React, so I'm just going to write them all again in a variable format, just like we learned in college. And we'll initialize them with the empty objects, but we will allow them to have the let option, so they'll be able to update as opposed to const. And all these arrays are going to be nested into an object. So some of the lighter, easier parts of the object will be one layer deep, but these form arrays and events arrays and all that, and then image arrays. Those are all going to be nested arrays in an object. So like I said, we're not using set state anymore, so our functions, our variables are going to be updated by just a simple equal sign here, as you can see what I'm doing in our switch case. So we still want to make sure that these are correct once we walk through and add them, but we can't use the same syntax. So I'll keep them up here so that you know what I did and what I had before. And then you can kind of see how I changed the file to basically do the same thing, but just for vanilla JavaScript. And it's the same as I'm doing here. Once I get the data, I need to set it into the object. So this is how it's all done. And then below this, you can see that that's where I'm building out the information that we've been typing in. Okay, so yeah, we'll just keep walking down this little line of items that need to be updated. Now, these are all basic things that you see on our generator. Like the CRUD application is basically how many APIs you're going to have, and the images would be in reference to a carousel, and similar with the videos, it'd be a carousel for that too. So these are all modules that you would technically already have built. Well, let's just keep on. We'll keep going and establishing these variables that we're going to use. Now we're also going to need to bring in a couple of files that were in the other React one. Timestamp and validate are both function files that were kind of living on their own. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste those in. Now clear. All right. Let's turn off the exports and then start building the hierarchy for the file. So instead of importing and exporting files with generic JavaScript, basically we're going to add a tag, a script tag, and a link to our CSS. So it all depends on where it is. If you are calling things in a certain file that exists in another file, the one that has the original call needs to be on top, obviously. And then as far as CSS concerns, what you want, the rules you want to actually apply that override everything need to be last. So if you have Bootstrap, you want to have your local style CSS underneath Bootstrap to override it. And then JavaScript, if you have like some kind of shared file, you leave that one on top and have your local files on the bottom so they can all call and work together in tandem without confusion. It definitely depends on which one is in order. Not so much when it comes to importing and exporting in React. Okay. Now that we're back in here, looking at what we have, my Bootstrap's working. I can see that there's some, the footer is showing that there's some overlap, as you can see. So we got to fix all that, and it won't be hard. We just got to add some stylings locally, and that should be helpful enough. And luckily, I can always use the panel down on the right to see what it will look like once I actually make the change without actually updating the file. Obviously, you just type whatever you want, and you can see, does this work or not? And then that dials it in on what, kind of padding you want or what you want your background to look like for your footer without you saving the file and going through the motions like that. Just use the panel, developer panel at the bottom of the browser for those quick updates, and then when you're done with what you want, go and make that change and save it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of what it looks like I've got an error here. But you can see that we're basically using the same functionality that I had with the React. I'm just not using the APIs. And so now I don't need this one big function at the top to encapsulate everything like I would in React. I just need it to run on load for a couple things as opposed to use effect. And then from there, everything that's imported is just done with a link instead in a certain hierarchy. So I think what I'm going to do also with this is I'm going to not have the fixed option for the footer. It doesn't need to have a float. It doesn't need to float. So let's just fill out the form and just kind of see where we stand. It looks like it's not building out those just yet. Those maps aren't working. So let's go ahead and take care of that as well. So we replace all the map functions for the drop-downs with something, a string that we load on the beginning of the page when we first load. So every time I want to have these numbers represented in a select drop-down, I'm going to do this, numbers total, and then I'm going to have a number, like basically that's the total amount of numbers I want it to iterate. And so I'll just pass that along when I do the JavaScript. Numbers total, and then you do 25 iterations, and that'll be that. And now I'm also going to do all these for the modules, because these are all for the modules only. And you can see that for loop up there where I've built out an iteration of 25. So I basically, now I'm going to build out the string that will go inside of those drop-downs that will be iterated from 0 to 25. And like I said, this used to be in React, we were mapping. We're going to map, kind of loop through, but now, no. We're just doing it this way. And then we have a target that we want to point this HTML string at once it's been built. And that target would be the select menu option area. And as you can see, I'm just building that out right now. All right, so once it goes through each of the elements, I want to get the attribute of how many iterations it has. And then when I do the for loop, I'll say, hey, is it up to this iteration yet, 25? And if so, we're going to stop printing. So that's why I put that number in there. Like, first off, I know which ones I want to run through the loop with and add this. And then now I want it to stop at 25. And there you go. So anytime I see that data attribute, I basically apply this list. So let's go ahead and fill out what we got and see how this is being generated now. Now, a blog, I want to get their RSS feed, their address, so I can actually plug in the blog in the website. But it doesn't look like it's running just yet. As you can see, it's not creating the nested list that I want. So let's just make a quick fix. Yeah, so there's my bootstrap. Let's do a little bit of repurposing. And I want to get this hierarchy correct. So as you can see, it's going to be moved around a little bit. And this is the one that has the ID that allows us to swap out the theme. So I got to make sure that's done correctly. Yeah, it seems to be working better. Now, let's go ahead and get that boot swatch file attached. There we go. That's what I want right there. Just make sure it's all in the correct order. And notice that now I can switch the theme and change it up so it works. All right, so like I said, I needed to replace those map functionalities with a for loop that built out a string so that I can apply this to the drop-down menus. Now, once I get the drop-down information, I need to point it somewhere. And so like every time they say I want to have 4 or 5 modules, it has to write, that number of input fields so that I can write what I want to name those modules. And so I need a target for that, and that's what I'm doing here. Data target, and then the video modules, the list of input fields for that will go there, and here it is for the images, and here it is for all the encrypted modules. Basically, once they've selected how many they want, I need some place to put all those input fields that they said they needed, and that's what I'm doing. I'm putting an HTML target is what I like to call it. And each one of these is going to have a spot where I said that I want, let's say, 2 or 3 modules for the events. And it's like, okay, it's going to write the fields out, and then I can type what I want to call them. And once again, this is a fairly simple move. I basically will write out the HTML fields that I want, the input fields, in a loop. So however many it says, I wrote that many input fields on top of each other, and it will be in a string called input HTML, which will be what I'll use for the target. And I'll also have to name these appropriately so that they have increments, so that when I save them, they're unique. So it would be like, events module -1, and then events module -2. And that way they're all separated out. And I have to prepare the form to do this. So this is a form that's made on the fly based on how many how many modules they'd like to build. And then my target gets pointed out right where it belongs. There you go. And we've got one more problem. Nothing we can't fix. There we go. Now you can tell the CSS is off because they're all right next to each other. So we just put in the class name form control, and we're off to the races, and it will look correct. And now I can type in as many events as I want, and they're all numbered in unique order so that when we write down our task list, it'll be prepared with all the items we need to go ahead and put together. So we also want to save this information. And that way, when we start the computer back up, it'll load up our options of which invoice you'd like to bring up and start dealing with and crunching. So here's the data. And I'm going to say that I'd like to put this data in local storage. So we do a simple set item, and we would name it invoices. And we'll go ahead and declare that up at the top of functionality.js. That way we can use it throughout all the other functions. It's accessible, and we'll be able to build onto it when we modify it. Because it's going to have a lot of nested details. And based on if it's an upload or a new, I'm going to do 2 different things. And depending on what it is, which function they want, I'm going to find out if they already have this domain and it's something that I'm going to be updating, or vice versa. If I don't have this domain, so it's something new. And so I'm going to find that out in this process here. And I'm just checking to see, hey, is there anything in local storage? Okay, well, if so, then invoices is whatever is in local storage. So that's a helpful little piece as well. Okay, we're going to use local storage to build out our selection list so we know which invoice we're going to be choosing. Now, these invoices are going to be an object that's going to be stored as a string within local storage. And that's going to be passed around I'm thinking actually when we build the time clocking in and out for the employee hours, we're still going to use the same object that I'm passing around in the invoice thing here. Because coincidentally, the invoice is going to be the master of all of our data for each ticket. And it's also going to be collecting hours and many other things. So this is going to be dialed in, and we'll know everything based on the domain, as you can see here what I'm writing. And the value will be the number. So it'll be the iteration within the object, and then we'll be recognizing it as by the domain that we've named it. By the client has a domain they'd like to, call their site, and let's go ahead and that'll be the name of the project. So let's fill out all the variables, all the names of the APIs, all the information. You see I've generated it, I've saved it in local storage, and it looks like the first one is saved with no values, just the keys. And then the second one, for some reason, has it. So it looks like we've got, appears to be a memory leak. So it's running the function blank with no information, saving it, and then running it again. And so this is common. What you want to do a lot of times is a simple hunt through your code and see why it decided to do it twice. It's pretty common. And then you sniff out saying, is this thing even real? Is there a real value here? And if not, then you don't want to build it out. And then you also want to find the memory leak. And usually a return false will cause the memory leak to stop. So let's build out where we want these invoices to point out locally. As you can see, they weren't showing up on the printout just yet. So let's go ahead and build those nested arrays into the object, and then we'll punch those out in HTML as well. The active order is going to be the iteration that will be called within the invoice object. And as you can see, the invoices would be the active order, and then from there we have event modules. So we're going to find out that is basically going to be run through a loop, and within that list, we're going to have the names of the modules, which is going to events, images, videos, forms, encrypted, and CRUD. CRUD is the APIs, basically. And we got to build out those so that when it loops through, there's fields to fill in the names. And then we also want to have them show down here when we print it out. As you can see, it just says there's no content for these modules. It's going to the default. So I am going to take this information and point it to where I want it to be once I have written out the string of all these fields. All the names need to be somewhere. They all need to be unique. We need to build them out. And then we need to put them somewhere so that they can be viewed. And so we go through all of these modules to see how many nested loops and how many iterations, and then we do it multiple times over based on how many modules we have. And so here I'm doing the CRUD modules. And CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. And I like to call them APIs because that's kind of what they are. It's not one block of code, it's multiple. Sometimes it's just an update, sometimes it's just a post, but for the most part, I would imagine most of the time it's 4 different calls. So an API consists of 4 on the server and 4 on the client side. They're rather large, typically. And here in this loop, I'm building out the fields that I'd like to have available. And so I need to start with an empty string. And then once I've gone through the loop, that empty string will be something that I can target and attach somewhere else. And here we go with the loop. So it says event array, and then it has the I++, and we all know that it needs to say event array dot length. So what I'm going to do, I'm just writing this really fast, and as you can see, I've got an error here. So I'll write these all out and you'll see that I basically building out the input fields so that they'll be named correctly, and they will fit into my nested object correctly. I have to have them iterated, so the name will be listed here with the dash and then the number of which module out of the multiple module events will it be. And then from there, I find the target for the events, and I put that string there for all the fields to be residing in so I can fill them out. And the same goes for all the others. So I'm just going to be copying and pasting this, and yes, I know it still needs to have .length in it. So, but you'll see as I go through the steps of each one of these modules, I have to build out. In React, it's rather, I wouldn't say it's any easier in React. Mapping something out and then applying it it's the same concept for the most part. It's a mapping and for loop. Yes, it's all the same concept. So you either do it here and then apply it at the target, or you build it at the target through a map, whichever way. Excellent. So we're getting along with the forms now. Make a copy so we can get a little bit further down and do it for the encryption array. We'll name it appropriately. The naming conventions are try to keep as consistent as possible so they don't get confused. And then now we're going to do the encryption. How many encryption fields are we going to have? Now, I would say you would have a certain extra value. It's not just an average thing. It has to go through encryption, so these will be a little more expensive. I would have a price in mind when you encrypt something. And here I'm building out the list for the orders for the invoices. As you can see, it's now working. And we're getting closer. As you can see, it's not putting out the correct thing. It says the string images. And so I need to unquote these so they're not strings and they represent the variable that we'd like. And so let's go ahead and take all the quotes out, obviously, because otherwise we're just hard coding those in as a string. And I will soon notice that the lengths need to be written. Let's see how fast it takes me to figure that out. There we go. Now I'm writing in the length. Make sure I've got them all. Let's go for another test. Okay, you can see that they're working now. But you see it has done it multiple times again. So we have a memory leak, a big one. You see how many times it went through? Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. How do you stop memory leaks? Well, it's not too difficult. A lot of times you just want to hit return false when you just don't want the JavaScript to read any further. You say, well, we're done here. We don't need you to, we need you to stop now. So once it's completed your task, you can verify that, and then that'll be the time you stop it. Now, also, we want this legal text to show up. So when someone has decided to print out their invoice, it has the legal text and shows their company name. So a little bit of just ironing out some details for that. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of preparing for validation in this section. The export HTML is going to give me a method whether I'm posting or I'm actually doing an update. And you're going to see here that I need to go ahead and do a little bit of validation to make sure things are prepared. Then I need to show my legal text, which I've actually, looks like my ID element is spelled incorrectly, so I'm going to have to fix that here in a second. But within this export HTML, you're going to see that a couple things need to be validated to make sure that we can actually run the functionality first. These things can't run otherwise, so here we go. I'm going to check to see if the method is default, and if it is, that means to post, so I'll just be adding something to the invoice already. If it's not something like a post, I need to find out what iteration it is so I can replace it. Now, we also remember we've got a memory leak, so let's get forward in thinking on how exactly I'm going to hunt this thing down. So we basically know with this memory leak, it's working too much. But you can also see with the timestamp that it's done it, it's not the same one. The timestamps milliseconds are different. So it's doing it multiple times over as fast as it can. So let's just tell it to stop. Return false. Say, please don't do that. Hey, these things turn gray, so that's too close. We go ahead and put those in there, and then we return false when we're over, after we've applied all the functionality. And then let's also remember that there's a couple of different ways to find out what that method is. So what I can do is actually make a for loop, and then find out if that URL is already listed in the URL domain list within that object. And if it is, I'll realize, oh, this is an update. Let's just update that iteration within the for loop. As opposed to like anything else, I can click the same button and it'll determine, hey, we know this domain name, and so in which case we're just going to overwrite the original. And that will determine whether it's a post or an update. And I play around with it a little bit, as you can see here. But that's my main goal, is just to figure out the easiest way to make sure that the computer knows what to do, and I don't erase anything, and we get everything updated correctly. And I also want to do, I'm going to just, as you can see, I'm just doing a few things to see what's going to work for me. See, it's working. We're getting those APIs and all those modules to show up. Let's do a post. Looks like I've got still a couple more issues. So we got to make sure that the invoice domain is real, because if it's not, we don't want it to even show up in the work order dropdown. And let's go ahead and put in some dummy information to see where we're standing and where this thing works now. I'm just doing some generic $5,000. Then if they, I'm just making up numbers. I think that would be the low end of a website for the most part these days. So I'm going to build out some carousel modules, recruitment, and history. 2 carousel modules for videos with history and perspective videos. Those are just names for modules. Like I said, these will end up being tasks as well for our development. So in which case, not only are we going to have them outright itemized lists to be paid for, but we're itemizing these out so we can build a task workflow for our development team. They're going to follow the same task as, coincidentally, our invoice. We'll be applying hours to each ticket, and thus far. This is where we stand with our legal, and we've stopped all but one leak. So it's doing it one more time. We don't need it twice. We need it once. Now let's just go ahead and validate what's going on. And so I'm going to say if this thing is real, if there is really, or not real, then we're going to return false and stop the whole thing. And I think we just cleared our leak up. It's like, hey, does this thing exist? No? Then we're shutting it down. We're not letting that memory leak go forward. And then we'll save the items in local storage once we know we've done it correctly. Let's do a couple dry runs to see how our software is working. We know that this is what the object's supposed to look like. So, does it work? This part's working, yes. Let's go ahead and run it through to see if we're building out one or if it's got a memory leak and it's doing multiple. Let's just do this one more time. You got to make sure that it matches what an email would do. And there we go. All right. It printed it out one time. Memory leak has been solved. And as we can see, if we have all the correct stuff in there and we collect it, it is building it out correctly. Okay. So let's get rid of this background real quick too. I'm going to serve it up and just iron out a few things that I don't want. I'd like to have my logo there like some of my other applications, but I don't. This isn't a game, so I don't really want to have my my game background, if you know what I'm saying, like the card background. So this is something from my shared CSS that across all my apps know this shared CSS, and I can apply them, and they will go immediately and change to what I asked it to, so they'll match up with the CSS that they all share and look like a traditional theme, that they're all one cohesive piece of work. And we'll get back to you when we start working on the hours. So we're going to have a bar graph with Apex charts in the next one. And so employees can type up how many hours they worked, and it will go apply itself per ticket. So how many hours per ticket were involved. And this work order is now available for the public to use. And so you go down and then check out the GitHub account. It's hosted for free. Go generate a couple work orders and get your idea of how you're going to build your business. Good luck.